and welcome to the 2018 Provincial All-Candidates debate for the County of Oxford. Great to see everybody out here. Woodstock is very politically active, and we always get a good turnout to these things. It's a pleasure to see and a pleasure to be a part of. My name is Brent Van Paris, and I'm a partner with BDO Canada, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I have weapons. I have a bell, and I have a stopwatch. That's the source of my power. That's right. So the format for the debate tonight basically is question and answer. Each of our candidates, and I'll introduce them soon, each of our candidates has 2 minutes to provide opening remarks on whatever topic they wish. And we have already drawn for order of speaking, and the order is in which they're sitting now. Questions will be asked first by our esteemed panel of journalists. And we have from the Sentinel Review, Bruce Urquhart. We have from the Chamber of Commerce of Woodstock, Alison Henkel. And we have from Heart FM, Marcy Colbert. So we have some good knowledge at the table here, so they're going to challenge the candidates. So the candidates get 2 minutes. We start asking questions, and the candidates will get 1 minute to answer the question, and each of them will get an opportunity to answer every question. Now, you're going to hear this bell every once in a while, and that just advises a candidate that there's a little bit of time left, and they need to wrap up what they're saying. And I've already explained to the candidates that it's a hard stop at 2 minutes and a hard stop at 1 minute. So you may hear me rudely interrupt them. It's not because I'm trying to disrupt them. It's because we need to keep this on time. Okay? So your candidates for the provincial election in the County of Oxford. First, speaking in position A, we have Tara King of the NDP party. Speaking second in the opening address is Chris Swift of the Libertarian Party of Ontario. Speaking third is James Howard of the Liberal Party of Ontario. Speaking fourth, we have Tim Hodges of the Freedom Party. Speaking fifth, we have Robert Van Weinswyk, an independent. And speaking sixth, we have Ernie Hardeman of the PC Party of Ontario. Excellent. Good stuff. So, can I have Ms. King for her opening address? You have 2 minutes.
Certainly. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Tara King. I'm your Oxford NDP candidate in Oxford County. And what I know is this election is about change. Not just any change, but change for the better. People want to change from a tired, worn-out Liberal government that has driven up hydro rates, seen the expansion of hallway healthcare, and failed to ensure the safety and basic needs of our seniors. What I hear is that people want a government that will work for them on issues that they are concerned about. They want a government that has thought about the changes that need to be done and have developed realistic, workable policies to bring change for the better to their lives. Change when it comes to health and long-term care, hydro rates, jobs, education, and our environment. Andrea Horvath and the NDP are offering change for the better. Change for the better that will provide a dental and pharmacare plan for all Ontarians. Change for the better that will fix the hallway healthcare problems and expand the number of long-term care beds in Ontario. Change for the better by legislating a minimum standard of care for our seniors in long-term care homes. Change for the better by reducing hydro rates by 30% without putting the burden on the taxpayers of Ontario. Change for the better by providing $12 a day childcare. The voters in Oxford and Ontario want to trust their government and feel that the government respects them. Respecting the voters of Ontario also means presenting a fully costed election platform. Andrea Horwath and the NDP have done just that. On the 7th of June, the people of Oxford want to send a message that change is necessary in Ontario. Change for the better.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Swift, your opening address.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Swift, your candidate for the Ontario Libertarian Party. I reside in Woodstock with my spouse and 2 children. I'm a full-time parent with vast and diverse experiences in the auto manufacturing, retail, service, and entertainment industries. I have long believed a change is needed in the way our governments operate. I believe that the status quo no longer has any interest in serving the people that helped to elect them. I want to change that by offering what the people truly deserve: freedom of choice, individual rights, and liberty. I want to start out by thanking the organizers of this event for allowing me to share with you my thoughts about how we can make these changes happen, how we can put more of your hard-earned money back into your pockets whilst yet having a plan to pay down our province's astronomical debt, how we can improve the economy, healthcare, and education, among other things, within the province, and how your individual rights and freedoms can be honored once again. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? See me in the back? Hello. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am so proud to be here today in Cowan Park with the next generation of leaders here in Oxford and our incumbent candidate, Mr. Ernie Hardman. I would like to thank the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, Heart FM, and the Sentinel Review for housing tonight's debate. I would also like to give a thanks to my fellow Wilfrid Laurier alumni, Brent, for being tonight's moderator. And I would also like to thank the public for their interest in local and provincial issues and coming out to support their local candidates. We would not be here today if it wasn't for you. Tonight's debate kicks off at a time when the public is more divided than ever about which political party's leader is best suited to be Ontario's premier, which platform is the most competitive for voters, and which candidate is most capable for representing Oxford in Queen's Park. The Liberal Party's platform is the most competitive choice for how it provides for our services, the transparency of its costs, and, the commitment to investing in the public's future over cutting short the potential of our future students, the future of our workforce, and those in our future care. Tonight I will show you that it is time Oxford choose a new public representative. At no other time in the history of our county have so many young, enthusiastic citizens made the choice to fight for what they believe in and to fight for their neighborhoods. I know I have the momentum behind me to make real change here in Oxford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. Oxford, you have a choice. You can stick with the old 3 parties that have been governing this province since its beginnings. These are the parties that have brought you high hydro rates. They've been wasting taxpayer dollars on climate change initiatives. They recently stuffed their own pockets with $60 million of your tax dollars. All 3 of the most recent of their governments have increased Ontario's debt by tens of billions of dollars. And even when it comes to that budget, neither the NDP nor the Progressives even bothered to draft an opposition budget. Tim Hodges and Freedom Party is your new choice now in Oxford. Our team has produced recently 3 balanced opposition budgets. A freedom government will not use your taxpayer dollars to fund any political party. We understand that there isn't any sort of magic weather machine that you can just feed tax dollars in and it will magically control the climate. So we will stop funding those climate change initiatives. We'll stop the green energy contracts that have been driving up your hydro rates. Now is the time to make Freedom and Tim Hodges your new choice in Oxford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hodges. Mr. Van Ryswick.
Hi. Oh, hello? Does this work? Oh, okay. My name's Robert Van Ryswick. I'm currently running as an independent. To many of you, that may be alarming. To me, I see it as a strategy. Right now, we live in a political world where we're seeing top-down authoritarian politics. It's neither the fault of those of you sitting in the audience or those sitting beside me here at the table. But I believe we do need a change. We've heard many issues coming from this side of the table, and many of them sound the same. We all have our own strategies on how to solve these problems. What we don't have is your ideas. Right now, all the ideas are coming from Toronto. And while I'm sure they've thought about it long and hard, they just don't understand Oxford the way we do. We've lived here, many of us, for all our lives, and yet we're not responsible for what we choose to happen in our county. So I'm here to represent all of you today and everyone who's not here in Oxford. I'm here to balance the budget. I'm here to say no to the carbon tax. I'm here to say no to the sex ed curriculum. I will fix hydro rates, and I will address local issues, such as the Ingersoll dump, the high-speed rail, and Oxford's Zero Waste Initiative. I'm here to support what Oxford wants, and I'm here to listen. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Van Ryswick. Mr. Hardiman.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank you all for coming tonight and thank the organizers of this debate. I'm privileged to have had the honor of representing Oxford in the provincial legislature, and I'm once again asking for that privilege. Over the last 4 years, I've heard a lot from people that are struggling because they're the actions of this government. People who are facing long wait times for health care they need, or having their surgeries canceled at the last minute because there's no more money in the budget. I've heard from people who are choosing between paying their hydro bills and buying necessities like food and medicine. And from businesses that don't know how they can continue to operate and keep the jobs in Ontario. I've brought forward those facts to the government and pushed them for action. And I know we've all done what we can with the efforts like Shop Local, but we need a government who understands the challenges we face. Every day we are announcing a new part of our platform, but it is based on 5 priorities. 1, cleaning up the hydro mess that would address the causes driving up your bills and reduce hydro bills by an additional 12%. 2, putting money back in your pocket with 20% cut to the middle class tax rate, no tax for people on minimum wage, and a tax rebate to help parents with childcare costs. 3, restoring responsibility, accountability, red tape, and cleaning up our hydro mess. 5, ending hallway health care. You need to be able to depend on the healthcare system, not be faced with long wait times or a system that doesn't have a bed when you need one. Again, I want to thank you all for coming, and I look forward to hearing your questions, and I hope that I can once again earn your support.
Great job, candidates. Now we're going to hear questions from our learned journalists. And the first question up will be read by Alison Henkel of the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce. We will start with Mr. Swift, will be the first respondent, and then we will go to our left after that.
Good evening. What will your party do to mitigate the impact of the Fair Workplaces, Better Jobs Act on small businesses in Oxford County?
Well, I appreciate the question. You know, the biggest problem we're seeing with small businesses right now is the burden that our current government has put on not only small business, but large corporations as well. We need to fix the hydro prices. We need to eliminate business taxes altogether, and we need to eliminate the carbon tax, hands down. Thank you.
Mr. Howard, same question.
Would you just repeat the question, please?
What will your party do to mitigate the impact of the Fair Workplaces, Better Jobs Act on small businesses in Oxford County?
Thank you. We want to create the strongest possible economic climate so that small and large businesses alike can grow and thrive. We know that some businesses have struggled with the transition to a higher minimum wage. That is why we have brought $500 million in new initiatives under the next 3 years to support small businesses here in Ontario, including lowering the small business corporate income tax from 4.5% to 3.5%, and we've eliminated the capital tax. We have saved businesses millions by cutting red tape through our burden reduction bill, and we've cut electricity costs by 25% for 500,000
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
small businesses. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges, same question.
I work for a small business, so I understand how this new legislation has been impacting the business, even when it comes to things like holiday pay, you know, just changing the calculations that have been around for many years, and now we have to change them. And now I've heard that from someone in the audience I was speaking to earlier, he told me that as of July 1st, they're switching them back to the old laws, now that we got used to the new ones. When it comes to the Act, we won't be doing any changes to the minimum wage, but we won't planning any future increases to it. That should help mitigate the costs in the future. We see that the damage the Liberals have done has already been done, and a Freedom government will help us recover.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
My position on small businesses is simple. I support them. I support them in any way possible. And I believe the most effective way to do that at the moment is to eliminate red tape laws. We've heard others already say that they want to eliminate red tape laws, and I find that very hard to believe, as they're the ones who put them in the first place. These are detrimental to businesses. My father is the owner of a small business, and this is what I hear coming from him all the time. Complaints. They're the worst thing possible for them, and many of them don't even make sense. So I will look into them. I'll see the ones that are absolutely not necessary, and that will relieve both financial burden and time burden. They're costly.
Mr. Hardiman.
Thank you very much for the question. And I just want to say I voted against Bill 148 because of the reasons that you mentioned in your question, that the impact on small businesses they're not able to absorb that type of an increase in that short of time. So our policy has been set that even though the bill says that the minimum wage next year goes up to $15, we will not make that move from 14 to 15. We will leave the one where it is. In order to compensate for the people can't live on $14 either, but to compensate for not going to 15, we will eliminate all the income tax on anyone who's working for minimum wage, so they will no longer pay income tax. The other thing, of course, that is in there, and it was mentioned earlier, is the issue of holiday pay. They did backtrack on that a bit, but it said that all part-time workers had to get paid for the holiday in the week that they worked in. So that some people could have 3 part-time jobs, get paid for 3 holidays.
Thank you, Mr. Hardiman.
Holiday week.
Ms. King.
Small businesses are the backbone of Ontario's economy. When small businesses grow and prosper, so does our province. Small businesses face unique challenges. Skyrocketing electricity prices have undermined the competitiveness of small businesses. And electricity prices are having the greatest impact on their ability to remain competitive. Doug Ford and the Conservatives have no plan to help small businesses in Ontario. Corporate tax cuts will only help large, profitable corporations like his. The NDP will work together with small businesses to create good jobs and support our local communities. We can build a more prosperous Ontario where everyone can share in the benefits of that growth. The NDP believes that the best way a government can support a small and growing business is by buying their goods and services, with the goal of awarding 33% of government procurement contracts to small businesses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King. Candidates, I remind you that I'll be starting the stopwatch when you start to speak. So please write the question down, or at least keep it in mind so you can get a full minute for your answers. Our next panelist to ask questions will be Marcy Colbert of Heart FM.
How would you support Oxford County's stated commitment to using 100% renewable energy by 2050?
Mr. Howard, your first respondent.
Thank you, Marcy. Well, as you know, here in Oxford County, we've recently made the resolution to go towards 90% zero waste at the county offices. As a member of Opal Alliance, I am very concerned about showing the rest of the province that we take waste management very seriously in Oxford. I also want to emphasize that this will be the best step forward for showing the entire county what we need to do is a model for the rest of Toronto and the province. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. As I stated in my opening, a Freedom government would get rid of the green energy contracts. So when it comes to this commitment that or pledge that the Oxford County has made, we think this actually hampers them in the future, and we ask that they look at reevaluating that situation. There's plenty of ways we can get hydro that are much cheaper, and we have to stay competitive. If we want things like the CAMI plant to stay in Oxford, the Toyota plant to stay in Oxford, these are big energy consumers, and they value those things. If hydro rates go sky high, they're just going to pick up and close. And I don't want that to happen to Oxford County. So let's put an end to this, and let's stop this now.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Could you repeat the question for me?
How would you support Oxford County's stated commitment to using 100% renewable energy by 2050?
I'd like to begin by saying I believe that we are all called to be stewards of the earth. I also believe that we have to find a smart way to do that. Right now, many people are complaining about hydro rates. That's probably been the most mentioned topic so far in the debate. And it's for good reason. Because of our our energy initiatives, we've shot ourselves in the foot. Our energy rates have gone up, and we're at the point where we're selling energy to other provinces for less than what it costs to make them. This is a system that needs to stop. I'm not one who wants to stand in the way of progress, and I understand that eventually we need to move towards this goal, but we need to do it more responsibly. Thank you.
Mr. Hardiman.
Thank you very much for the question, and I think I agree with most of what has been said. I think it's a great project. I think we all should be working on harnessing Mother Nature to make power. I think that's a great thing to do. Having said that, I think we have to be careful that we don't make power that we don't need, and that we don't spend so much on it that we can't afford to use it. If Oxford County can put all these facilities in place, use the power, and do that in an economical way, then I support it 100%. But if it requires them making the power, sending it into the grid so the people can pay double for it, and then buy it back for half the price so they can use it and say we're 100% renewable energy, I think that's a mistake. We have to get back to producing the power we need in the most economical way and in the best environmental way.
Ms. King.
The government has signed too many long-term hydro contracts that force Ontarians to pay private corporations for a massive surplus of overpriced energy they don't need and can't use. And so when Ontarians do the right thing and conserve energy, their hydro rates actually go up and not down. Now, Ontario families pay among the highest residential electricity costs in Canada, and peak hour electricity rates have nearly quadrupled since 2006. Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals sold off Hydro One, and it caused the rates to soar by 300%. In March of 2018, it was reported that the CEO of the privatized Hydro One salary had ballooned to $6.2 million. Well, unlike Wynn's $40 billion hydro borrowing scheme, which the PCs will keep in place, the NDP's hydro plan will address the underlying costs of hydro instead of pushing the problems into the future. Our plan will lower hydro costs for all ratepayers by 30%.
Mr. Swift.
So as far as the waste numbers, the goals that were set forward for Oxford, I mean, the Green Energy Act needs to be repealed. It is costing us way too much, and there are many cheaper options out there that can save taxpayers and ratepayers money. At the end of the day, we need to let free markets decide. Thank you.
Mr. Urquhart, your question.
Good evening. Good evening. There we go. There we go. It's estimated healthcare funding needs to increase by 5.3% annually over the next 4 years to keep pace with rising costs to protect critical services. How would you support that need?
Mr. Hodges, you are the first respondent.
Thank you. One of the things the Freedom Government has talked about in the past is allowing competition to return to the healthcare system. This is something that the Progressive Party of Ontario outlawed way back in 1968. And at the same time, they brought in the income tax. So the people that think that that's the party of low taxes, that's how they got the money to cover it, was through the income tax. What we plan to do is repeal the Ontario income tax and then let you spend the money you would have then on a health insurance company of your choice, or we would maintain a ration system of government health insurance that exists now would be similar to the OHIP system. Thank you.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Healthcare is probably the biggest consumer of our tax dollars here in the province. It's certainly alarming to hear that that's still going to find a way to go up. What I can see right now is that we are funding non-essential healthcare services, and that needs to stop. There's no reason that our taxpayers should be paying for other people's elective surgeries. That's my solution.
Mr. Hardeman.
Thank you very much, and I think you hit what they say, the nail on the head with the problem we have with an ever-increasing population, aging population, and an ever-increasing need in health care. It's hard to keep the cost of health care where it needs to be. But one of the things that we need to remember is that we've got to find the most efficient way of providing the health care we presently provide. So it just seems to me of how we fund hospitals. And I was talking the other day, we have a long wait list for cataract surgery in our hospitals. We have the doctors that can do the surgery. We have a hospital that can oblige that, but the budget doesn't have enough money in it to provide that service. So we are paying to look after that that illness for all that time while people are on the wait list, and then we have to spend the same amount of money to do that. We have to find a better way of putting the package together so we can do it more effectively and efficiently. We've hired a doctor to help us.
Thank you, Mr. Hardeman. Ms. King.
Ernie, why don't you tell the voters here in Oxford where you and Doug Ford are going to cut $2 billion from the healthcare system, and tell us how many nurses you will cut, and how many home care workers will be cut, and how many staff in long-term care homes will be cut.
Because it's not true. That's why I'm not telling
We,
that.
the NDP, will restore hospital funding immediately and ensure every hospital's annual funding will be at or above inflation and population growth. We will create 2,000 new hospital beds right now to end this hallway healthcare crisis. We will ensure that hospitals have the staff they need to provide excellent patient care. We will stop any further layoffs of nurses and frontline healthcare workers. Thank you.
The fun begins. The fun begins.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Swift.
We need to reduce costs, wait times, and end healthcare rationing. We will attach average per person healthcare funding to the individual and not to OHIP. We would allow non-government insurance options in addition to OHIP, and also allow healthcare professionals to work outside of the currently limited OHIP monopoly. 26,513 people left the province for healthcare in 2016. Why did they have to leave? Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you have heard it yourself. It is impossible to keep costs down when we have a growing population with growing needs. The Liberal government is increasing the healthcare spending by 5% to reduce wait times and increase access across the entire healthcare system. And this includes $822 million to support Ontario's publicly funded hospitals, and an additional $2.1 billion, totaling over $17 billion for mental health over the next four years and addictions to deliver more accessible integrated care. When Doug Ford was asked how he is going to find $4 billion in savings by the CBC, what does he say? He says, just watch me. Well, watch you do what? He hasn't told anyone.
Next question to the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Henkel.
What will your party do to address the growing affordable housing crisis in Ontario and in Oxford County, particularly? There are currently more than 1,200 households on the local waiting list for affordable housing, and there are many other families that are on the brink of homelessness.
Mr. Van Ryswyk, you are the first respondent.
Well, first off, I'd like to say I don't have a party. Secondly, I'd like to say, to be honest with you folks, I haven't researched this issue. I recognize it to be an important issue, and that's certainly an alarming stat. No one should have to go without a home. It's the first thing that everyone needs. After that, you build your families. So this will be on my priorities to figure out. I don't want to lie to you people. I don't know everything, and I don't have people in Toronto telling me I need to know everything and telling me what I need to know and how I need to say it. You've heard other people here. Thank you.
It's the province.
Their answers are by the book. Mine are not. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for the question. And it's something, the affordable housing is the file I've been working on for some years now, provincially, to try and bring the government to the table to talk about dealing with 172,000 households that are waiting for social housing to move into. It's growing by 45,000 families a year. Now, this is just too much. Now, how do you deal with it? You have to create supply. We have to build product faster. We have to put that on the market in a way so there's housing there for everyone. Social housing needs to be paid for, but it needs to be built first. All houses are the same. The difference between the houses is who's paying the rent. And so we've got to make sure that we build houses for everyone. If you go to a lot of places in Oxford too, the cost and the time for the application to get from bare land to building a house is far too long.
Thank you, Mr. Hardeman. Ms. King.
Thank you. And it's called preparedness, son. You'll learn that too one day. Housing is a human right. Owning a home that you can afford remains a dream for most people. Access to safe, affordable housing is what Ontarian people need. So what we are going to offer to do is create 65,000 new affordable housing units. We're going to build the new affordable homes over the next decade with 2,000 units that are going to be not-for-profit and co-op housing. We're also going to maintain rent geared to income houses and rent supplements. We'll also introduce the housing speculation tax, which will put a surtax on foreign and domestic speculators who don't pay taxes in Ontario. We also want to... That's good, thank you.
Go, keep going.
No, that's good.
Mr. Swift.
So the one thing I will agree with Ernie on is that we need to increase supply. And there is a lot of red tape and regulations in place that prevent urban sprawl. At the end of the day, if housing's needed, we need to build it because the free market demands it. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you. While a strong housing market is reflective of Ontario's strong economy, we know that affordability is a real and growing concern. That is why we've introduced the Fair Housing Plan to stabilize the market for home buyers and renters, with 16 measures introduced to make home buying and renting more affordable and fairer. We've expanded rent controls to protect people against sudden, dramatic rent increases that force people out of their homes. Locally, we have the Blossom Park Passive Housing Community Development Project. The provincial government has contributed $1.5 million with the federal government into this program. Ernie knows this. He was there to cut the red tape. Now, the NDP say they'll put 65,000 homes in Ontario to address this problem, but that is not true. There are only 20,000. There's only enough money in the National
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
For 20,000 homes. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. Ernie is right in the fact we need to improve the supply of affordable housing. Now, Freedom Party does not have an official policy on this in this election. However, in the past, we have supported getting rid of the rent controls that the PCs brought in that stifle new housing from being built. We will, in the past, like I said, we've supported getting rid of those so that private companies can come to market with new affordable houses for the people without the need for government funds. We're at the point, nearing the debt wall. We just can't afford too much more debt to take on. So we need to repeal this stuff so that we can bring affordable houses to more people.
Next question to Heart FM. Ms. Colbert.
Will you commit to pushing your part to build capacity and quality in Ontario's ailing long-term care system so the roughly 34,000 people waiting for beds can be guaranteed sufficient levels of care in public institutions?
Mr. Hardeman, you're the first respondent.
Well, thank you very much. And yes, our policy says that we will build 15,000 new beds for the first 5 years and another 15,000 in the second 5 years for 10 years. heard. I think it's very important to recognize that that's a part of not only to look after the people that are going in those beds, but it's part of the hospital function too. We have far too many people that have to stay in the hospital because there's no beds for them to go in. When you tell someone that we're going to have a place for you 10 years from now, for someone who's waiting for a nursing home bed, that's just not an acceptable way of treating the people that have made this the great province that it is. I think we need to make sure that we have an ability to look after these people, so that's why we need to increase the supply, but also make sure that we give them to the right people.
Ms. King.
Maureen Pickering, Gladys Millard, Helen Matheson, Arpad Horvath, Helen Young, Mo Garnett, Mary Zerwinski, and James Silcox, the victims under the care of Elizabeth Wetlaufer. Ontario's seniors deserve care that protects their safety, health, and treats them with respect and dignity. They deserve a government that will ensure they get it. The last Conservative government made deep cuts to health care. Kathleen Wynne had been doing even more damage, and together they've swept problems under the rug. What Andre Horvath and the NDP will do, they'll expand the scope of the public inquiry into long-term health care to include the systematic problems, including the Wetlaufer case. And she will do that within the first 100 days of winning the election. And it will be a find and fix approach. So when they find it, they're gonna fix the problem, not wait 4 years to find out the inquiry and then fix it. Thank you.
Mr. Swift.
So you can approach this from two different angles. One, treat it like our healthcare approach and have average per person funding. This will allow facilities to compete for an individual's dollars, as opposed to funding being siphoned right into facilities and it being mismanaged and abused. Now the other approach, yes, there is a supply issue in Ontario, but we can also treat this from the private sector in the sense that if you take our whole platform into consideration, it will stretch people's dollars, as well as allowing for individual per person funding to go with their own investments. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Every Ontarian deserves to grow old with dignity in a safe and compassionate environment. That is why we are continuing to make critical investments in this sector. We have opened over 10,000 new long-term care beds and redeveloped 13,500 since 2003, including 900 redeveloped new beds since January 1st, 2015, and we have announced that we will be opening 5,000 new long-term care beds over the next 4 years, as well as providing 15 million more hours of nursing and personal support annually for residents in long-term care homes. Our budget is investing over $300 million of the next 3 years to increase staffing in long-term care homes, and this is part of our commitment to increasing services for our seniors. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. We don't have any official policy on this, but I can tell you from my own personal experience, my grandmother went from needing some bit of care in home with things like VON to transferring over to assisted living and then to a nursing home. She basically went through the whole system, and I was with her throughout that. As far as our policies on this, one of the things I see is that when we have a monopolized healthcare system where we don't see any sort of bills for the system, we're not seeing where the actual costs are. We can't clearly compare the cost of a hospital bed to the cost of a nursing home bed. Those costs are being hidden, and a Freedom government will open up the system so we can see what those costs are.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Earlier, I had mentioned about our healthcare system that non-essential services needed to be defunded. This is not one of those services. These are the elderly of our society. I've worked for a retirement home for the past 2 years, and what I can tell you about the elderly is that they built our society. They deserve our respect, and they certainly deserve these beds. It's the least we can do to the people who have raised us and the people who have created our province to be what it is.
Next question to the Sentinel Review, Mr. Urquhart.
Checking. Okay, it's working this time. How would you work to provide local municipalities with more authority over proposed landfills and other unwelcome developments within its own borders?
Ms. King, you're the first respondent.
Wow. Ontarians are proud of our natural heritage, and we know that our well-being relies on the health of our environment. The NDP has long been a strong voice for both environmental sustainability and fairness. We believe that water is a public trust. The Harris Conservative government privatized water testing, fired Ministry of Environment workers, and gutted environmental regulations, which led to the Walkerton disaster, according to an inquiry. Ford has flip-flopped over the Greenbelt, striking backroom deals and recanting. The NDP knows that conservation is cheaper than costly new infrastructure, so conservation first will guide our energy planning to avoid unneeded costs and keep bills low. The NDP will stop and reverse loss of provincially significant wetlands. The NDP will create a clean water strategy and ensure that every Ontarian has access to safe water for swimming, fishing, and drinking, and keeping the dump out of Oxford.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Swift.
There are already laws in place that protect the well-being of individuals and the environment. A libertarian government would certainly uphold these laws and individual rights in a provincial jurisdiction. However, we also believe in the protection of private property rights. Therefore, if a property owner can 100% guarantee responsible assurance to abide by the law and the safety of these rights, we would not be in the business of intervening and preventing the prospect of hundreds of jobs and prosperity for the region. Waste management has become very innovative, and there's a lot more yet that can be done to further ensure that the protection of the environment and the surrounding population is not violated. If these terms cannot be met, then there's no way they would be allowed to operate, hands down. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you. As a researcher for Opal Alliance for my master's thesis, I studied the Environmental Assessment Act and the Environmental Protection Act, looking for ways in which municipalities may be able to stop landfills. And I am telling you today that no government in their right mind would attempt to amend that legislation. The Planning Act would have been a great opportunity for municipalities to advocate for their rights. However, our current representative wasted the public's time and went over and over and over again saying the same things. What happens when our public representatives don't have the information and the research that they need to properly advocate for their communities? They waste. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. We have no official policy on the dump as a party. However, I will say that anyone basically with half a brain looking at the proposal by Walker Industries and looking at how an environmental assessment works would definitely turn down this proposal. Now, as far as dump proposals go, we can see from the track record of the Liberals how they acted when there was a dump in Elgin County where the London MPs were all pushed by Londoners to oppose the dumping of Toronto's garbage there, and the Liberals members voted unanimously in favor of it.
We fought in Timmins Bay.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
First of all, I'd like to say that the comment made previously wasn't fair. It's not that he was being wasteful, it's just it wasn't close enough to election period to do something yet. So. Secondly, I'd like to say if you can find someone in Oxford who wants this dump, I might consider supporting it. If not, it's obvious that we don't want Toronto's trash. Not in our backyards and not in our politicians either.
Well, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to say that my Liberal opponent is totally wrong. In fact, this cannot be mitigated through the Planning Act. It has to be through the Environmental Protection and the Environmental Assessment Act, because the landfills do not apply to the Planning Act, and that's what the government has been telling us. The reason that we introduced the bill to give the municipalities the willing host authority, so the applicant has to get the willing host from the municipality. That's when the minister gives the approval. That can't be done when they're looking for it, because there's no legislation to cover that. So it's not that this is delayed, it's just that this is the time that it has to be done, and it needs to be done before Walker finishes the environmental assessment on it and makes application for a landfill. We all need to understand they haven't applied for a landfill yet. They're in the process of getting an application ready.
Thank you, Mr. Hardeman.
I want to be ready to say no when they get there.
Now we're going to start the last round of questions from our panel. This question to the Chamber of Commerce, Ms. Henkel.
While the unemployment rate may be at its lowest in almost 2 decades, there are many Ontario residents who remain underemployed and are struggling to make ends meet. Does your party, or do you, have a strategy for keeping employers in Ontario and bringing new employers as well as good, well-paying jobs to Oxford?
Mr. Swift, you're the first respondent.
The Ontario Libertarian Party will make Ontario a job magnet. We will put in place a sensible electricity policy. We will put in place a sensible government and taxation plan, including balancing the provincial budget. We will repeal the job-killing cap-and-trade carbon tax and end any program and service related to mitigating climate change. We will end corporate taxation. Corporations will still pay and remit HST. We will end all subsidies, grants, and loans to corporations and other private entities to eliminate favoring. You know, at the end of the day, all these past government policies that keep hurting small businesses and large corporations, again, I'll say it many times tonight, let the free market decide. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Ontario's unemployment rate is at its lowest level in 7 years. For the past 17 years, for the past 3 years, Ontario has led all G7 nations when it has come to economic growth. We continue to lead the country in foreign direct investment. Through the Southwestern Ontario Development Fund, the Jobs and Prosperity Fund, and other programs, Ontario has invested over $50 million since 2011 into businesses in the Oxford riding. Ontario has invested over $711 million since 2003 into businesses in the Southwestern Economic Region. This has created and maintained a total of 48,000 jobs in the region. Just last, I'll finish.
Keep going.
Thanks.
No, you go.
All right, okay. We will be bringing the jobs. We have the most competitive plan.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. By lowering electricity rates, this is one of the key inputs that businesses look to whether or not they're going to start up or transfer to this province. We would get rid of those expensive green energy acts, which aside from helping individuals, they will also help businesses being able to have lower electricity rates to operate their business. We will also say no to any sort of price on carbon. So whether it's a carbon trading scheme, a carbon tax, any sort of price on carbon, as we said before, we will not be raising tax dollars to try and control the weather. The other thing is we will try and balance the budget so businesses that look to set up here aren't worried new taxes will come in to fight that.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Thank you. Over the years, we built a great system here in Canada. It's called the free market. I don't understand why all of a sudden now the government, and not just our current government, but our past governments and those who are trying to form government as well, are all trying to limit it. We have the carbon tax, we have high hydro rates, and we have the infamous red tape laws, the bane of every small business's existence. So if we get rid of those three, we can trust our small businesses to grow. They're the best thing to build families, they're the best thing to build society, and they are the best thing to build jobs, especially here in Oxford.
Mr. Hardiman.
Well, thank you very much. And I know that there are people who are worried about their future and their job, and they're struggling to find a job. And I've raised this issue often in the legislature. Under Kathleen Wynne's Liberals, we have lost 300,000 manufacturing jobs, 1,500 in Oxford County in one single year. Despite all our efforts, we watch this government force business after business out of Ontario. I want to commend everyone who made the effort to support our businesses by shopping local. We need to attract business to Ontario and not drive them away, as Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals have done. We would do that by cutting red tape, stabilizing industrial hydro rates through a package of aggressive reforms for everyone, and lowering corporate taxes from 11% to 10% to stay competitive with our neighbors. People will not come here to do business if they can do it and make more money somewhere else. We have to be competitive. We should not have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars to Toyota just so they can expand the business.
Thank you, Mr.
Here.
Hardman.
We should have an environment that they could afford to do it without having government support.
Ms. King.
The number of people working more than one part-time job to make ends meet has jumped 20% since Wynne became Premier. 1 in 4 Ontarians are minimum wage workers, and that number has more than doubled since 2003. Mr. Hardiman is correct. The Liberal government sat on the sidelines for more than 15 years, while more than 300,000 manufacturing jobs left this province. And I bet you dollars to dimes, Doug Ford has no plan to bring them back. The NDP will implement universal pharmacare and dental care for everyone, attracting people to come here and establish new jobs. The NDP have a plan to reduce hydro bills by 30%. We will invest in mid-career education, and we will make workplaces safer. We will protect the right to join a union, and we will increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Thank you.
Next question to Hard FM. Ms. Colbert.
What will your party do to support and improve interregional and intra-regional transit in Oxford County for residents who cannot drive or afford a vehicle?
Mr. Howard, you're the first respondent.
Great, thank you. Hello? Okay. I got it. We've got a lot of issues to cover. We know that investing in infrastructure helps maintain a strong economy and high standard of living. It also helps to increase fairness and increase opportunities for all Ontarians. That is why we are investing over $230 billion in public infrastructure over the next 14 years. I didn't start talking though, just I thought it was the rules. Okay. Over the next 14 years for roads, bridges, and transit supporting 125,000
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
jobs each year.
Mr. Hodges.
When it comes to the high-speed rail, it's just too expensive. We don't have the population density to basically pay for this sort of thing. And if you want to know how we became the most indebted sub-sovereign nation in the world, it's by supporting projects like that. Like the Union Pearson route. I remember reading, it was a star of the Toronto Sun, basically said that you could take a bus and it would be much cheaper than the new high-speed rail. When it comes to improving regulations, we've in the past opposed some of the taxi regulations that basically prevent people from starting their own transportation businesses and being able to provide transit between different areas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Mr. Hodges is 100% correct. Fiscally, it doesn't make any sense. We should be looking to other options like the high-performance rail. What he forgot to mention, however, is that farmers in Oxford don't want a train going through their crops. It's annoying. This is our county, and we're not going to let them tell us, what they're going to put through our own backyards. So, also when it comes to our transit system in Woodstock, the busing system, I don't see very many people using it as it is. So I don't believe that we would have it in our finances to expand on that. However, if possible, I would support those who are less fortunate if it's in the budget.
Mr. Hardeman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, could I have the question repeated, because I haven't heard an answer that matched the question I heard.
What will your party do to support and improve interregional and intra-regional transit in Oxford County for residents who cannot drive or afford a vehicle?
I was going to say that the fast train or the high-speed rail is not able to do that at all. And I think what's really important is the issue of transit and the government policy that only funds transit where you already have it. And that's why in Oxford County we don't seem to get transit or get interregional transit, because we don't have it. All the gas tax money that comes to municipalities from the gas tax that the province gives back to municipalities, they only give it to municipalities that have transit already. So Woodstock gets some of it, but the rest of the county do not have transit, so they don't get any of that.
Thank you, Mr. Hardeman. Ms. King.
An NDP government will develop a comprehensive southwestern transportation strategy, a transportation strategy that will take cars off the road and thin the traffic. It allows commerce to move. It makes Ontario greener, and it connects people with opportunities like jobs, education, and their family. So although no one specifically mentioned about municipalities, the NDP government does have in plan to match municipalities in their funding for in their transportation. But I just want to let you know that the Conservative government canceled the Eglinton subway and literally filled in the foundation that had already been dug and paid for, so they clearly care nothing about transit. We will continue about the high-speed rail. We will continue the current high-speed rail environment assessment and expand it to include other high-speed options like high-performance rail, which use existing tracks and are considerably less expensive while still protecting prime farmland.
Thank you, Ms. King. Mr. Swift.
You know, for the same reason that I think people in Oxford don't really prefer to have their tax dollars go transit when they can't reap the benefits of it, I don't think people in other parts of the province would want to see this high-speed rail go in through our lands either. And I definitely want to talk about how the proposed appropriation of land is unacceptable. People have property rights, or at least they should, and the government shouldn't be dictating what should be running through their backyards at the end of the day. Thank you.
Okay, the last question from our panelists goes to the Sentinel Review. Mr. Urquhart.
Hello. I was going to ask about high-speed rail, but I think that's been taken care of. What is your party's strategy and/or strategies to make post-secondary education, particularly tuition, more affordable for all Ontario citizens / residents?
Mr. Hodges, your first respondent.
To be honest, at this point, we don't have any plans to make any changes to the tuition system. As far as the tuition rates go, it's up to a lot of the students to make sure that we can keep those rates the way they are. I've seen in London where we've had things like the Ivy School where they've just trying to decide where they want to be in the world, and because they've decided that they want to go with a higher end system, the tuition rates there have basically skyrocketed so as to accommodate the more expensive teachers that they're trying to bring in. I'm a college graduate myself from Fanshawe College, and I've always been a big supporter of that system. It's quite affordable, and I think it provided me with some great training.
Mr. Van Renswick.
Thanks. Currently, our government already has systems in place to help cover tuition. As was previously mentioned, our provincial debt is skyrocketing, and Mr. Hodges did mention it is the largest subnational debt in the world, and I believe that just makes us the laughingstock not only of Canada, but further. That should be priority number one. I understand the importance of education as a university student myself, and I understand how difficult it can be to pay for it, but look what I'm doing now. I don't think the university degree is helping me out very much. So I think we need to look into other options, as universities are now steering away from being as useful as they used to be. So.
Well, thank you very much, but I wanted to answer the other question that you were going to ask on the high-speed rail, which in fact is that we believe that we should have a full environmental assessment, which would include looking at other options, and I think that was mentioned by my New Democratic colleague. But the present government has taken that a little further and said they can't look at any other options. They have to do an environmental assessment just on the rail that goes through all of North Oxford. And I think we should have one that looked at all the options that we could use. On your question now, I'd like to say we have to work harder at making the OSAP work better, so people could get the monies to stay in university and pay it back at a pace that they can do after they're finished, to make sure that they can also have a life when they come out of university, not be borne down by by that debt.
Ms. King.
$486. That was my OSAP payment each month. You can just imagine the burden that had on my young family. So, under an NDP government, every student who qualifies for OSAP will get a non-repayable grant instead of a loan. We will wipe out any student loan interest owed or paid. We will have a faculty renewal strategy which will convert contractors to full-time professors, which is very important. It's such a precarious job as an educator in the post-secondary system. That's all I have to say about that.
Mr. Swift?
When it comes to post-secondary, I mean, schools are already competing for basically your business. You know, they want you to go to your school. I don't know how that has to be any different with, you know, choosing where you're going to put your dollars for school, and I don't think the government needs to be involved in post-secondary at all. Again, they can compete, let the free market decide. Again, I'll say that. And, you know, if they find that, if the schools find that their numbers are dropping as far as attendance goes and all that, then they need to make adjustments. That's how the free market works. Thank you.
It is thanks to our Liberal government that 235,000 university and college students received free tuition this year. We are opening new doors for people who don't have the opportunity, that hadn't had the opportunity before, including 13,000 single moms who now are going to school for free. We are also increasing the minimum salary people need to earn to $35,000 from $25,000 before they start repaying their loans. It is about increasing fairness and creating more opportunity in this province. Regarding high-speed rail, there is no municipal government, and there is no government here today that is against the concept of greater transit in this county or in this province, and there is no party that is against high-speed rail. The local interest groups and concerned members of the public, want representation, and they know they have my support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Now we're going to get an opportunity here to answer, for the candidates to answer questions on what you want to know. That should be very interesting. All the questions are going to be read by our panelists and candidates, the same format. It's going to be 1 minute response, and the first question will be read by, there are 6 in total. Yep, good stuff. Ms. Henkel, first question be read by the Chamber of Commerce.
The carbon tax has had a definite effect on individuals' spending abilities, increasing costs, etc. Will the individual parties, if elected to power, consider offering individuals carbon tax credits for their efforts to reduce their carbon footprint?
Mr. Van Renswijk, you're the first respondent.
Sorry. I will not support the carbon tax. It's detrimental to businesses. This question is null and void to me because the carbon tax cannot happen. The people of Ontario and the people of Oxford have spoke about this. We don't want it. It's very unfortunate that there isn't a party in Queen's Park right now that agrees with us. And that's why I think that we need a change. The carbon tax is nothing but a government attempt to grab more of our money. It has nothing to do with saving the environment. After all, Canada isn't really responsible for the global destruction. We all know who's really at fault there. And when they try and do something about carbon, maybe we'll consider doing something as well.
Mr. Hardiman.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to say that there was a little glitch in his statement because there is a party that is opposed to the carbon tax at Queen's Park. We will not be implementing a carbon tax, primarily because the cap and trade that the present government put in place, it doesn't really reduce the carbon footprint of anyone. It allows the people to pollute more by buying credits from someone who supposedly reduced less, but there's nobody keeping track of how much that was, so we send hundreds of thousands of dollars to California to buy credits that they supposedly are producing less carbon, and we are paying for that in our gas bill at 4.3 cents a liter. I can tell you that if we get elected, that will be gone and gas will drop at least 4.3 cents.
Ms. King?
We do support the cap and trade. We will put 25% of our cap and trade revenues. They will go to support lower income, rural and northern households and trade exposed industries. We will introduce a new $50 million no interest and on-bill home retrofit program to help people consume less power at home. We will update the Environmental Bill of Rights, and we will clean up the mercury in the English Wabigoon River system. Thank you.
Mr. Swift.
The Ontario Libertarian Party does not support cap and trade, and they do not support carbon taxes. The Prime Minister said that if we cancel any form of carbon taxing, that he would force it on us, and I'd love to see him in court when we are elected. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Carbon credits incentivize polluters to reduce the easiest pollutants. Whether anybody here or Doug Ford believes in climate change or not, expensive federal carbon pricing is coming unless we stick with our current plan, which is already working. Ditching it would increase gas prices by 11.6 cents per liter by 2022, as the federal government's own analysis suggests. Doug Ford doesn't understand this, and he'll make Ontario families pay more at the pump because of this mistake. The people at this panel are also forgetting about the costs of trying to force Ontario out of our linked carbon market with Quebec and California. Independent legal experts have said that it would take years to do and it would potentially cost billions of dollars. We do not need to go to court for this. Scrapping cap and trade will increase greenhouse gas pollution.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. We would not provide any tax credits towards this, as we oppose any sort of price on carbon. So that means no carbon tax, no cap and trade, and we would withdraw from the Western Climate Initiative. If the federal backstop is implemented, where the federal government tries to bring in a carbon tax and impose it on Ontario, we would fight in the courts, as it is not their jurisdiction to be taxing Ontarians at a different level. And if they do such a thing and we do lose in court, we would repeal the Ontario gas tax, making that null and void the federal backstop. Thank you.
Okay, the second question will be read by Ms. Colbert from Heart FM.
When the youth suicide epidemic occurred 2 years ago, every party leader stood in the Ontario Parliament and said dollars needed to come to Oxford and mental health. No dollars came. We are still waiting for community dollars for mental health. When will mental health dollars come for community partners, and how will your party pay for it?
Mr. Hardeman, you're the first respondent.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I agree with you that the promises made at the time when it was in the media have not been followed up on. I met with Lynn just a few weeks ago to try and figure out why the promises that they had made hadn't happened. As a party, we are putting in $1.9 billion matched by the federal government in the mental health envelope to deal with the mental health issue, both in housing and in treatment and in all the other things that we need. Anything that deals with mental health and addiction, we'll do that over a 10-year period. But I don't know what happened to the money that was supposed to come, or even not only just the money, there was a need for working together. When the issue was here in Woodstock with the suicides, in fact, the biggest problem that we had locally, nobody knew who was in charge, nobody knew who was going to take control of it. And
thank you, Mr. Hardeman.
We need to put that in place.
Ms. King.
Today, 11 ministries across government deliver a patchwork of programs and services for mental health and addictions. The result is predictable and damaging, a confusing, hard to navigate system with far too many cracks for people to fall into. It has been 8 years since the Legislative Select Committee selected a committee on mental health and addictions, and that recommended urgent changes. The Liberal government has ignored most of those recommendations. The NDP government will not ignore it. We will establish a new dedicated Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. We will ensure access to mental health care for more than 28,000 more Ontarians every year by hiring 22 new mental health care workers. We will build 30,000 new supportive housing units, and we will cut children's mental health care health waits to a 30-day maximum with a $590 million investment.
Mr. Swift.
When we're talking about mental health and addiction services, first thing that comes to mind for myself and anybody else in the Ontario Libertarian Party is why isn't it part of mainstream healthcare? It needs to be. And again, with our healthcare plan, average per person funding would be attached to the individual, and the individual can get the services and the help they need as they see fit. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
We know that 1 in 5 Ontarians will experience a mental health illness in their lifetime. That is why, in our 2018 budget, we are making an additional $2.1 billion for over the next 4 years to improve access to mental health care and addiction services for more people, bringing the total to $17 billion to be spent over the next 4 years. This means that more than 12,000 young people in Ontario will be able to access community-related services, such as here in Oxford, the Oxford Elgin Child and Youth Centre, which has received over $3.1 million in 2016-2017, and this is supporting mental health, child and youth mental health services in Elgin and Oxford for the next 4 years, as well as the Children's Aid Society has received $15.8 million in 2016-2017. Local autism service providers have also provided over $141,000 in 2016-2017 for autism services.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. Mr. Hodges.
So the basic question is, where's the money? This was a promise made, but let's be honest, we're so deep in deficits and debt right now, the cupboard is basically bare. So this is why Wynn's check got lost in the mail.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
I'm very happy that this question got asked. It's one of the most important issues in Oxford. As someone, I was in high school at the time when it happened, and I lost a dear friend of mine because of it. I am disgusted that so far every solution has involved finance. Sure, we can throw money at the problem, but this is just a symptom. The actual problem is the society that these kids are growing up in. We need to look at how they're being raised. We need to support families. We need to support those who support the kids who are having the problem. Money isn't going to fix this problem. We are.
And the third question from the floor will be read by Mr. Urquhart of the Sentinel Review.
Hello. How will you / your party bring the Ontario Disability Support Program into the modern era? Right now, maximum monthly shelter allowance is allotted at $479 a month for an individual, which is unrealistic. Thank you.
Ms. King, you're the first respondent.
Oh. I do know that I didn't have time to flip through my pages, but I do know that the NDP are committed to increasing ODSP by 5% and then also increase it with inflation. I received an email from a gentleman that felt concerned about being stuck in his family situation and dependent on his spouse because with the two incomes, there still wasn't enough money for him to get out. And we will also increase supportive housing units for people that need it, and those services that those people need to get out of abusive relationships or need extra help with housing. Thank you.
Mr. Swift.
I will agree with the fact that current ODSP funds and allowances aren't realistic, but we wouldn't make any changes to that, but we would make other changes that, you know, fixing problems that the government has created. And we really feel that under our platform, all-inclusive, your money can go a lot further. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
The Ontario Liberal government is investing $2.3 billion over the next 3 years to support a significant start on reform, the largest single investment in 25 years. We have raised social assistance rates in 13 of the last 14 years, including in this year's budget of $2.3 billion. And over the next 3 years, we will be raising rates 3%. We are also proposing an increase in earning exemptions from $200 to $400 a month in the first year, and in year 2 to annualize the exemption to $6,000 per year, a 150% increase compared to today. Regarding ODSP, the income support is administered directly by the province, as we know, while the Ontario Works and ODSP employment supports are administered through direct social services administration. So these are now provincially funded 100%. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. So the Freedom Party doesn't have an official policy in their platform to address this. Personally, knowing with my conversation with people that have been on ODSP, I have long supported the idea of increasing the allowance they're allowed to get when it comes to working. I think right now it's at $300 a month they're allowed to bring in without it affecting their pensions. I'd like to see that go up maybe $400 or $500, maybe $600. The other thing when it comes to the minimum wage increase, one of the sad effects we see on this is that basically raises prices, and people on ODSP are hit the hardest, or social assistance, by these rising prices.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
I believe it's at this point that we have to ask ourselves the question, where are we getting all this money from? Every answer I've heard from some of the other people sitting at this table is, oh, we're going to pay for that. We're going to pay for this. We're going to pay for that. They forget that it's not them paying for it. It's everybody sitting here today. This is our money, and we're going to run out of it. Our currency is made of plastic and metal. It does not grow on trees.
Well,
Mr. Hardeman?
Well, it's hard to follow that, because there is some sense in that. But I think we do need to realize that there is a challenge here. Obviously, the cost of living keeps going up faster than the increase in the funding for that sector. You mentioned just the shelter allowance, but it's the rest of the check too, as to it's not keeping up with the cost for the people. We haven't got any specific policy on that. The issue of increasing that rate is done based on budget to budget, but we do. People on minimum wage will not pay taxes. That'll be a saving of $800 a year. We would clean up the mess that Hydro has been, another 12% off their hydro bills, and child care rebate of 75% up to $6,700 to help people get by. I think it's obviously more needs to be done, but I agree with my colleague here. There comes a time that you have to evaluate the amount of money you have and evaluate as to where the
Thank you, Mr. Hardeman.
Put it in.
The next question from the floor will be read by Ms. Henkel from the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce.
What incentives will you and your party provide to Oxford County businesses to assist with the costs associated with waste reduction, zero waste, and new technologies?
Mr. Swift, you're the first respondent.
Sorry, repeat the question, please.
What incentives will you and your party provide to Oxford County businesses to assist with the costs associated with waste reduction, zero waste, and new technologies?
I bet you guys are gonna guess what I'm gonna say here is let the free market decide. This isn't something I think the government should be involved in. I think people want to reduce their waste and take initiatives themselves to do it. I think a lot of companies do that, and I certainly encourage it, but I don't think this is something we need to legislate or anything like that. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
Thank you. So the Liberal government is providing over $64 million to improve efficiencies and redirect savings across the... Sorry, let me start again. The Liberal government is providing over $100 million in businesses of all sizes to encourage new clean tech and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We have over $20 million to build up against fast charging, or being spent for fast charging, building electric vehicle stations across the province. We know that that businesses in Oxford need incentives in order to help reduce local waste. I would encourage the public also to get in touch with local organizations such as Zero Waste Oxford. They will attend events such as these, or even events that have food products, and provide on a volunteer basis.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
And zero waste. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
Thank you. At this time, we have no additional plans for new corporate welfare initiatives. Thank you.
Mr. Van Weinsick.
I'm going to go a little off the book here, surprise, surprise, but how many people here today would like to see us progress forward when it comes to green technologies? Can I get a raise of hands? All right, so it seems to me that we have enough people here that would support such a thing. We don't need the government to do it for us. As Mr. Swift said, let the free market decide.
Mr. Hardiman.
Well, again, I want to agree with everybody on the stage, but I do believe that it's very important to recognize that waste disposal is the responsibility of local government. And I commend Oxford County for going zero waste. And there are certain programs that come from the Ministry of Environment to assist in recycling and other things to reduce waste on a case-by-case basis. But it's local government's responsibility to deal with the collection and disposal of the waste. So we all benefit from it, but as was said earlier, we all have to pay too.
Ms. King.
Can you ask the question again, please?
What incentives will you and your party provide to Oxford County businesses to assist with the costs associated with new technologies, waste reduction, and zero waste?
Well, we do know that the small businesses are the backbone of Ontario. And when small businesses grow and prosper, so does our province. Small businesses face unique challenges, like waste disposal. Skyrocketing electricity prices have undermined the competitiveness of the small business. So what we're proposing is that the NDP work together with small businesses to create good jobs and support our local communities. We can build a more prosperous Ontario with everyone that can share in the benefit of that growth. The NDP believes that the best way a government can support a small and growing business is by buying their goods and services from those small businesses. And that will help you with your waste problem. Thank you.
And the next question from the floor will come from Hard FM, read by Ms. Colbert.
With affordable childcare critical for many young families, particularly those who need subsidized spaces, how will your party address the continued subsidy needs for low-income families?
Mr. Howard, you're the first respondent.
Thank you. Our Liberal government is making high-quality, licensed childcare free for preschoolers between the ages of 2.5 to full-day kindergarten starting in 2020. By investing $2.2 billion over the next 3 years, free childcare for preschoolers will save families $17,000 until they reach full-day kindergarten, which has saved families $6,500. Every dollar invested in childcare translates to a $2.50 benefit to the Ontario economy because it increases the working hours and wages of women. We are also supporting world-class early childhood educators and program staff that deliver this care and improving compensation through a wage grid that will be started in 2020. Ontario is investing $40 million to support child care programs as well in First Nations communities. Thank you.
Mr. Hodges.
For many years, my mother ran an in-home daycare, and I believe she ran it quite well. In comparison to there was a daycare nearby that was licensed, they charged 45% more money. So, and my mother made a profit, paid taxes. The other daycare that charged 45% more, when their floor ran out, they ended up having to get a government grant because they were a non-profit so as to replace the flooring that they had. So when we talk about how we become so deep into debt, it's things like that that cause that. So I support more in-home licensed child care from people like many mothers that basically do it in their own home, and I think a mother can provide great care. Thank you.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
Sorry, can I just ask for the question to be repeated, please?
With affordable childcare critical for many young families, particularly those who need subsidized spaces, how will your party address the continued subsidy needs for low-income families?
So again, I believe that we're just addressing a symptom of the problem. And I think we need to look at the reason why that we have these low-income families. And again, it's because of the way our society is structured. We have a problem with government intervention and stopping the free market. In a free market, we all have the opportunity to grow in both our families and our financial situation. So I think we need to look at supporting small businesses and families indirectly by freeing the market rather than directly in using taxpayer funds.
Mr. Hardiman.
Yes, we get that parents are struggling with the cost and availability of childcare. We put forward a plan that helps parents with that cost while still letting you choose the childcare that works for you and your family. Whether that is a babysitter in your neighborhood who can accommodate your work hours or a licensed childcare provider, by providing a tax rebate, a rebate of up to 75% of childcare expenses, saving parents up to $6,750 per child. Our plan includes all children from infants up to 15. Other parties believe one size fits all. Government child care, which means limited times, limited location, and in the case of the Liberals, most ages won't be covered. Our plan will put more money in parents' pockets and respect the choices, needs of moms and dads in deciding what's best for their kids.
Ms. King.
Nothing is more important than knowing your child has the best, safest care possible. The child care availability in Oxford County is basically non-existent, with wait lists up to 2 years. In Tillsonburg alone, there are more than 80 children waitlisted, and ironically, we just closed the non-for-profit child care building in Norwich, if that makes any sense. After 15 years of government promises, Ontario is Canada's most expensive province for childcare. So what we, the NDP government and Tara King, will do is we will make sure that every family can access affordable, high-quality, not-for-profit childcare. With household incomes of under $40,000, you will not have to pay at all. If your household earns more, your fees will be based on your ability to pay. At the most, with an average cost, coming up $12 a day. We will expand the number of not-for-profit licensed affordable childcare spaces in Ontario by 202,000 spaces.
Mr. Swift.
I don't think this is an issue that you can just throw legislation and money at. I think what we need to do is, again, reduce or eliminate the problems that government themselves created.
Get rid of children?
I'm talking right now. Give me a sec here. I made a conscious decision to leave my job and raise my children on my own, and it is a struggle. I understand it. But if you take our platform into consideration, we can stretch your money further. We can make we can make problems easier to manage when we have our own decisions and our own money to work with. Thank you.
Our last question from the floor will be read by Mr. Urquhart of the Sentinel Review.
What will your party do to maintain the strength of our rural and small-town schools?
Mr. Hodges, you are the first respondent.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Sure. What will your party do to maintain the strength of our rural and small-town schools?
At this point, we don't really have any changes we plan for as far as school funding goes. In the past elections, we have, though, supported the idea of direct tuition to schools, where parents could pay directly to the school that their child attends, instead of the complicated system where we have right now of income tax or school taxes and provincial funds going to the schools and basically hiding the cost of schools. I know when it comes to the private schools, I remember many years ago we looked at Montessori school. It was $5,200 and it was $7,800 at the same time for a Thames Valley District School Board year of tuition for a student.
Mr. Van Ryswyk.
My small town rural school in grade 7 closed. I understand how difficult the transition is for many kids when their school closes, especially like me if it closes on the year before they're supposed to graduate. But I also recognize that our province does have limited funds. A lot of these questions don't, and a lot of these answers understand that even less. Moving to a different school can be difficult, but it's not impossible. It's an opportunity to meet more people. It's an opportunity to hear more opinions. It's an opportunity to be more integrated into society. I loved my small school. I didn't love the next one, but I learned from it. Not from the teachers, but from the experiences.
Mr. Hardiman.
Well, thank you very much. And I do believe that the evolution will carry on and some schools will close and new ones will be built, and we've seen a lot of that happening in Oxford. The process we use is called an ARC to look at the accommodation review, and they have to consider a number of things. But they don't seem to put any weight on the things that they've considered, and they just implement the report they originally decided. I think we need to put a moratorium on to get something in place that, in fact, they look at what the school is doing in the community besides educating children, and make sure that that is not lost in the transition to a different environment. And they haven't been doing that. In the original studies, they actually looked at the impact, the financial impact it would have on the community. And then they didn't pay any attention. They just closed Norwich High School anyway. And I think that that was just wrong. And I think we need to do a better job of looking at the art process. And we should stop the actions we're doing now until we've got that figured out.
Thank you, Mr.
Make sure we protect
Hardeman.
the community hub.
Ms. King.
So chronic underfunding has led to issues with classroom violence. Education workers report some of the highest levels of lost work time due to injuries in the workplace, and parents are growing uneasy about their children's safety at school. School boards are not being given sufficient resources to ensure the well-being of all learners within a classroom. So I want to let you know that since 2011, the Liberal government has closed 270 schools and put another 300 schools on the chopping block, schools that were an essential part of their communities. The last time that the Conservatives were in power, they closed over 300 elementary and 7 secondary schools throughout the province. They're the same. We don't want worse. We don't want bad, and we don't want worse. We will hire more teachers and educational assistants. We will cap kindergarten classroom sizes at 26 students. And we will stop the closures of schools that are mandated for closure right now. Thank you.
Mr. Swift.
Parents should have more choice and control over their children's education. The Ontario Libertarian Party will attach average per student funding. Sorry, let me read that again. Average per student funding will be attached to the child and not directly to the school. This includes non-publicly funded schools as well. This will allow for competition between schools and school boards to uphold the highest level of performance possible. So per student funding will apply equally to non-government schools and homeschools, although no non-government school or homeschool will be required to receive government funds. Any government legislation that ties curriculum to per student funding or anything else will be amended to specifically exclude non-government and homeschool delivered education. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
We know that schools play a vital role in our communities, and we want to give our kids the best possible start in life. The Ontario Liberal government has embarked on the largest building program of new and repaired schools in the province's history, with $18 billion to build new schools over the next 10 years. In the last 5 years, we've invested nearly $600 million to build approximately 30 new rural schools and 160 additions and retrofits in rural communities across Ontario. We've pressed pause on future school closures while we overhaul the pupil accommodation review process, because we recognize that there were challenges for rural and northern communities. We have posted an amended draft of the pupil accommodation review guideline around rules that guide decisions around student accommodations in schools for public comment, and we are currently reviewing the feedback to improve guidelines for school boards.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Communities. Thank you.
Ladies, that concludes our section of the program dealing with questions from our panel and questions from the floor. They were good questions. We got to explore a lot of the issues. I'd like to express your appreciation for the candidates. They did a wonderful job at this. This is a tough format. I'd also like to thank Bruce Urquhart of the Sentinel Review, Allison Henkel of the Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, and Marcy Colbert of Heart FM. Great job on the panel. So candidates, you will have 2 minutes to make your closing remarks, and the first remarks will be made by Mr. Van Weinsrick.
I'd like everyone to look to that side of the room, just for a moment. There's 3 different parties there, and we've seen them for a very long time. There's 2 different names, and then there's the logo. What I see there is Toronto. That's where their leaders are, and that's where their leaders are interested in. It's where they get their support from. Toronto is a lot more people, and thus they're going to look after them before they look after us. There might have been some promises here tonight that says they're going to support local things like stopping the dump or stopping the high-speed rail. Those promises might very well be empty. We know that politicians have a history for backtracking when it's not their prerogative anymore. Once they've got your vote, they will no longer need you. They'll be gone. They will be in Toronto, and that's where their interest will stay. I've been born and raised here, and this is where my heart is. I care about the people in my riding. So if anyone wants to approach me about what I intend to do, the answer is, it's what you want me to do. I represent Oxford County. I am accountable to no one but you. Thank you.
Mr. Hardiman.
Again, I want to thank the organizers for putting this evening together. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight and your questions. I will stay afterwards if anybody wants to discuss any of them further. Many of the questions you have raised are the same issues that we've been talked about in my office, at Tim Hortons, and in other events. We've been able to solve some of these cases, but to solve the broader problems we're facing, I believe that we need a PC government. We need a government prepared to address the hydro mess. Both Liberals and NDP parties voted for the disastrous Green Energy Act that put up the cost of your hydro bills. We need a government who understands that families are already struggling and they can't afford a bigger government that takes more of your money. On a personal level, I want to say it's an honor to represent Oxford. I'm always proud to talk of how great our community is, to try and help the people of Oxford when they have problems and to ensure that the government is aware of the challenges you are facing, how their policies have been impacting you and what you need. I hope that you will give me the privilege of continuing to work for you. Thank you very much for this evening.
Ms. King.
For so long, we've been told to settle for less, to switch between conservatives and liberals who make our lives harder. Ontarians are looking for change. They don't want change where ideas are thought up on the back of a napkin. They don't want change that will result in over $2 billion being cut from our healthcare system. They don't want change that will result in over $1 billion being cut from our education system. That is the change that Doug Ford and Ernie Hardiman are offering. Doug and Ernie believe you can improve our hallway healthcare in hospitals and provide better care for our seniors in long-term care by cutting $2 billion. Doug and Ernie believe that if you improve our education systems, you need to create larger class sizes and reduce access to supports for special needs students by cutting $1 billion from our education system. There is no room to trim that fat. Doug Ford and Ernie Hardiman criticize the Liberal hydro rate plan that will result in borrowing billions of tax dollars to reduce hydro rates, but are planning on following the Liberal plan anyways. It does not have to be this way. It's time we do something completely different. Let's make sure our loved ones get the health care they need when they need it. Let's make sure our students enjoy their education in the communities that they've grown up in. Let's support good jobs that build on the strengths of this region and give young people a better start. Let's make life more affordable. We don't have to settle for less. Change for the better isn't only possible, it's coming. On June 7th, vote for Tara King in Oxford. Thank you.
Mr. Swift.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I fully understand and can relate to the struggles that poorly designed, unfair government policies and restrictions create for everyone every day. The status quo does not have a plan to fix the problems they collectively created, nor can they be trusted to. It is imperative that we reduce the size and scope of government. We can all win if we finally begin to reverse the damage the status quo parties have caused. Thank you once again for having me out tonight to talk about libertarianism. You can find out more at libertarian.on.ca, where you can find our platform and a profile on yours truly. It is my honor to represent the Ontario Libertarian Party in Oxford, and it would be my honor to serve the people of Oxford as of June 7th at Queen's Park. When you go to the polls, please remember this. A vote for me is a vote for individual rights and responsibilities. It is a vote for true alternatives and choice. It is a vote for more prosperity and freedom. Together, we can all explore new possibilities and enjoy a better tomorrow. On June 7th, vote like your future depends on it, because it does. Thank you.
Mr. Howard.
My journey to this debate began 2 years ago after accepting admission to a graduate program in applied politics. I asked myself, what can I do to help my neighbors? It became clear that supporting grassroots efforts to stop millions of tons of trash from being dumped outside my hometown deserved the attention of a citizen who wanted to make a difference. That commitment helped me to defend my master's thesis. That commitment took me through Blandford Blenheim, East Zora Tavistock, Tempsford, Ingersoll, Norwich, Southwest Oxford, Tillsonburg, Woodstock, and Zora. That commitment introduced me to the citizens that have concerns with high-speed rail. On April 24th, that commitment took me outside of Queen's Park for the first time, where I demonstrated against the impending dump. What a coincidence how similarly Hardman's described his first trip to Queen's Park, having demonstrated against the sulfur dump all those years ago. On May 1st, that commitment took me inside Queen's Park, where I had the privilege of advocating for local groups to Liberal Party members and the provincial government on issues of the dump and high-speed rail. These groups know that they have my support. This commitment demonstrates what a citizen can do for Oxford. Imagine what can be done if that citizen was your member of provincial parliament. Oxford representative needs to be more committed to supporting local issues at all times, not just on the eve of an election. Oxford's representative needs to be able to rock the boat and willing to rock the boat and be a strong advocate. And today, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as your most competitive candidate, and I am telling you, I am ready to rock.
Mr. Hodges.
Ernie mentioned why we need a PC government, and I'm going to give you a few reasons why I think we don't need a PC government. The high hydro rates that we started getting into the debt, all because of the nuclear cost overruns that started under a PC government. The wait times, which we're now experiencing, was set up, the OHIP system was set up under a PC government. Doug Ford has said that he will make some cuts and try to find efficiencies, yet he has no actual plan to do this yet. He'll just try and figure it out when he gets there. Now, in the past session of the legislature, the PCs and the other parties filled their bank accounts with your money. And when it comes to balancing the budget, they had no energy or interest to create an opposition budget. We pay these politicians good money. They need to do some work for it. Now, why freedom is your new choice now, we have actually made a plan with 3 balanced opposition budgets. And no one's actually paid us to do that yet. A freedom government won't use taxpayer money to stuff their own pockets. We won't be spending any more money on climate change initiatives that we just can't afford, and frankly, will not make any difference to the temperature of the planet. We'll scrap those green energy contracts so we can bring you lower hydro rates. Vote for Freedom and Tim Hodges. Your new choice now. Please also check out our platform at freedomparty.on.ca. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that concludes our program for this evening. Once again, I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Sentinel Review, Woodstock Chamber of Commerce, and Heart FM. Ladies and gentlemen, one of the signs of a healthy democracy are a bunch of people that are very passionate about their country, and in this case,